Newcastle United's Sandro Tonali is now being investigated alongside Juventus' Nicolas Fagiolo and also Aston Villa's Nicolas Zaniolo for an apparent breach of betting rules. This news broke after the three met up at the latest international break with Italy. Fagiolo has already been given an 8-month ban from football, 5 months of which he will be doing community service as well as a £10,000 fine. Whilst Tonali and Zaniolo both deny any involvement in illegal betting, they are still in the process of being investigated. They could both face up to a 10-month ban from football with a fine on top if they are found guilty. What is your opinion on the Sandro Tonali ban?
I think it's a fair ban. I feel like as a player, as a role model, like you should be doing more to care for your club. If you're betting for your club behind their backs, it's a bad look on you, bad look on the club itself. I feel like it's quite poor, in my personal opinion.
Do you think it was the correct decision to ban the player for the length of time and he trains for the last 2 months of it? Is that enough time for him to get up to match fitness for him to start a game?
Obviously, I feel like the ban's quite fair. As betting rules, it should be up to a year, 2 years, and 18 months is a fair amount of time. That's a year and a half. But obviously, training, there's not really much you could do. Like, you have to train to keep fit in general. If you lose your form, if you lose your fitness, you won't be able to play certain games depending on what the manager's expecting. But overall, I feel it's quite fair. Like, there's nothing really you could do if you're not involved in games apart from try and keep as fit as possible.
You can imagine that he's doing the fitness training by himself. He's probably got a coach with him, but is it going to be enough for him to keep the same form up that he had at AC Milan when he was one of the best CDMs in the world, arguably?
I feel like it will be difficult, obviously, but it will be difficult in any circumstance, like not being able to play football regularly like you used to. But it's just how the player takes it. A player like, in recent circumstances, Florian Wirtz or whatever, he'd been out for an ACL for obviously normal time. He came back better than ever. If you face a ban or face an injury, you come back better than ever, just depending on the way you take it, depending on your discipline.
And it's a very similar situation to the even Tony, isn't it? That obviously the ban is shorter. It's 10 months longer for Tonali. Is that a fair ban? Obviously, Tony had a lot of charges against him. Were they worse for Tonali because he was involved in the matches? You know.
I feel like the situation's definitely similar. Obviously, they were both betting for their club, whether they're involved or not. But I feel like it's match fixing to a degree, anyways. Because if you're involved in a match, you could easily play an impact in that, and you're just gaining money out of it. Like, and also, as you said, like, it can play a part in whatever. But I'm not too sure about the whole time frame of it. Like 8 to 18 months, it's quite a big difference, especially with how many charges were put on Tony's side. Obviously, I don't know how aware we are of Tonali's, but I feel like it's a fair ban in itself. I feel like it's obviously betting for your team.
And Newcastle are preparing a lawsuit against AC Milan. Do you think that AC Milan have to hold some of the responsibility in letting the player go, whereas they might have known about the ban and they've sold him cheaper than they were expected to?
I feel like most definitely the lawsuit, I see why it's happening. Obviously, AC Milan, if they were aware of it, it's poor on them. It's putting bad light on them because he hasn't faced the ban earlier. Where now he's facing the ban at Newcastle, where I'm not sure whether he's bet for Newcastle or not. But if he faced the ban earlier, Newcastle wouldn't be facing such a big loss right now. Because a player like him, he wasn't really paid for that much in this sort of market, but with a player of his obviously quality and player of his like ability, they will need him, especially in these runs right now, Champions League runs, where they haven't felt that in how long. And obviously playing for AC Milan, he was a regular in Champions League football, so it will be a huge loss for them. And obviously, if a club's aware of that, they should obviously be more honest and obviously give the player the ban.
And obviously you mentioned about the Champions League, that they're chasing. Is it going to affect their season? They need a top 4 finish to get Champions League again, or they need to win it, which is unlikely. But without him, the midfield looks like it's got a few gaps in it. It could be a tough season for them in the Champions League, could go out of the first round. But do you think it will overly affect them in the Premier League or the Champions League as well?
I feel like, as mentioned before, a player playing such regular like Champions League football, I feel like it will be a big loss for them. But I don't think we've seen too much of an impact in the Premier League to kind of define that. Where they have the team that they have now, they have played in the Premier League before with that team or a very similar team. So I feel like it wouldn't be too drastic. But obviously, they paid big money for the player they got, and they would need him in the aspects that they obviously paid for him for. But I feel like they will lose a lot of form with the team they have. I'm not sure whether they have too much depth to kind of cater for the player that's gone to fill in his positions. But yeah, I feel like it will overall definitely will affect them.
And January's coming up. Will they spend big? They were looking at the likes of Calvin Phillips, McTominay to replace him. Are they going to be up to the par of replacing a player of that quality?
I feel like them players themselves, they are very good in what they can do. Potential is definitely there for both of them, which haven't necessarily been proven yet. But if they can replace him in an aspect with like another world-class player like Calvin Phillips, obviously made a big impact with England, and we know his quality. But January they will have to spend big money to replace him.
Yeah, and obviously, what happens when he comes back? Will Phillips or McTominay, if they do get signed, where do they go? Do they go out on loan, or do they sit on the bench? Because them players, they won't like sitting on the bench. They want to be fighting for a first-team squad. Calvin Phillips hasn't played a full 90 this year. You won't want to go into another team where he's not playing. Where would they go?
I feel like if they were to making a signing now would be risky in that aspect. But if they can make a long-term investment in a player that they can probably keep in the midfield partnership with Guimaraes, Tonali, and obviously an extra spot if they decide to spend that money. But I feel like if they were to make a deal, I feel like a loan deal would be a smart decision with probably a player from a different league, or if they can get a deal with Man City for Calvin Phillips because he's not obviously playing regularly, I feel like that would be a good shout. But it's all down to the board, what they think is best for their team.
23-year-old Tonali has been capped by the Italian national team 25 times. However, if he's found guilty and receives a 10-month ban, he will miss the Euros if Italy succeed at qualifying. Newcastle managers Eddie Howe stated that Newcastle would throw their hands around him, along with the fan base giving Tonali a lap of honour in the latest Premier League game against Crystal Palace. A spokesman from the local news station suggested that players should not be allowed to bet on their own games, as players may go out of their way and change the way they play to win the bet, which would ultimately suggest match fixing. However, unexpectedly, the fans have not shown much rebellion against the player, and have actually shown him a lot of respect. Magpies are fighting for another season in the Champions League this year, meaning a top 4 finish, and the loss of Tonali would make this job a lot harder.